remember the sound my keys made that night when they hit the floor. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I had just finished my 4th consecutive shift at the hospital, double shifts back to back because we needed the money. My feet were swollen, my back was screaming, and my eyes felt like sandpaper. But I pushed through it all because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You sacrifice, you endure. You believe that tomorrow will be better if you just work a little harder today. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, except for a soft glow coming from the living room window. I thought maybe Theodore had fallen asleep watching television again. My husband had a habit of dozing off on the couch, claiming he was waiting up for me, even though he'd be snoring within minutes. I smiled to myself, imagining him there with his mouth slightly open, the remote control still clutched in his hand. After the day I'd had, even that small image of domestic normalcy felt comforting. I grabbed my purse and the small bag of takeout I'd picked up on the way home, Theodore's favorite, chicken and waffles from that little place on MLK Boulevard that stayed open late. Even though I was exhausted and hungry myself, I'd spent the last of my tip money on his dinner because he'd mentioned that morning how much he'd been craving it. That's the kind of wife I was, the kind who remembered the little things, the kind who put her husband's wants before her own needs. The front door was unlocked, which should have been my first warning. Theodore was usually so careful about locking up at night, especially with all the break-ins that had been happening in our Houston neighborhood. But I was too tired to think clearly, too worn down to notice the signs that were probably obvious to anyone whose brain wasn't foggy with exhaustion. I pushed the door open quietly, not wanting to startle him if he was sleeping. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold, even before my mind could fully process what it meant. It was laughter. Soft, intimate laughter. The kind that happens between two people who share secrets. The kind that doesn't belong in a house at midnight when a wife is supposed to be at work. My hand froze on the doorknob. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then I heard his voice, Theodore's voice, low and warm in a way he hadn't spoken to me in months. "You're so beautiful when you laugh like that," he said, and I felt something crack inside my chest. I don't remember walking down the hallway. I don't remember my feet carrying me toward the living room, but suddenly I was standing in the doorway and the scene before me burned itself into my memory with such clarity that even now, months later, I can close my eyes and see every detail with painful precision. Theodore was on the couch. Our couch, the one we'd saved up for and bought together when we first got married. And she was there too. Loretta, our nanny, the young woman I'd hired to take care of our 3-year-old daughter while I worked those endless shifts. She was wearing one of my robes, the silk one Theodore had given me for our anniversary. Her head was resting on his shoulder, and his arm was draped around her in a way that spoke of comfort and familiarity. On the coffee table in front of them sat 2 wine glasses, half empty, and the bottle of expensive wine that had been sitting in our cabinet for over a year, the one we were supposed to open on a special occasion. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me at first. I stood there, frozen, watching my husband tuck a strand of hair behind the nanny's ear with a tenderness he hadn't shown me in what felt like forever. The bag of takeout slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. That's when they looked up. I wish I could say that Theodore jumped up, that he looked guilty or ashamed or sorry. I wish I could tell you that he immediately tried to explain or apologize, but the truth was so much worse. He just stared at me with this blank expression, as if I was the one who had walked into the wrong house, as if I was the one who didn't belong there. And Loretta, she had the audacity to give me this small, pitying smile, like she felt sorry for me, like I was some pathetic creature who just discovered something everyone else already knew. "Theodore," I managed to whisper, and I hated how my voice cracked on his name. "What is this?" Before we continue with what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this story and feeling even a fraction of what I felt that night, please take a moment to subscribe to Precify Stories and turn on that notification bell. Hit the like button because this story is far from over and you're going to want to hear every single word of what happens next. And please comment below and let me know what country you're watching from. I want to know that I'm not alone in this, that someone out there understands what I'm about to share with you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand who I was before that night and who I had to become after it. My name is Teresa Townsend, and I grew up believing in fairy tales. Not the Disney kind, with princes and castles, but the real-life kind, where a good woman meets a good man, they fall in love, build a life together, and grow old holding hands on a front porch somewhere. My mama raised me to believe that marriage was sacred, that it was a partnership built on trust and love and the willingness to stand by each other through whatever storms life threw out your way. When I met Theodore Warren at a church social 6 years ago, I thought I'd found my forever. He was charming in a quiet way, not flashy or loud, but solid and dependable. He had a good job as an insurance adjuster, drove a decent car, and talked about his dreams of one day owning his own agency. He treated me with respect, opened doors, called when he said he would, and made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. Our courtship was everything I'd hoped for. He'd pick me up after my nursing shifts, even the late ones, because he said he didn't want me taking the bus alone at night. He'd bring me flowers on random Tuesdays, just because he was thinking of me. He met my mama before she passed and promised her he'd take care of me, and the way his eyes got watery when he made that promise made me believe he meant every word. We got married on a Saturday in June at the Little Baptist Church on the corner of Washington Avenue, surrounded by friends and family who all seemed genuinely happy for us. I wore my mama's wedding dress, altered to fit me, and Theodore looked so handsome in his suit that my heart actually skipped when I saw him waiting for me at the altar. When we said our vows, when he slipped that ring on my finger and promised to love me in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, I believed with every fiber of my being that we'd make it, that we were different, that our love was strong enough to withstand anything. The first year of marriage was beautiful. We lived in a small apartment in Houston's 3rd Ward, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Theodore would wake me up with coffee already made, and we'd sit together at our little kitchen table planning our future. We talked about buying a house with a yard, about having children, about saving up so I could eventually work fewer shifts and spend more time at home. Everything felt possible when we were together. I got pregnant 9 months into our marriage, and Theodore was over the moon. He'd rub my belly every night and talk to our baby girl, telling her about all the things he was going to teach her, all the places we'd go as a family. When Diane was born, weighing 6 pounds, 3 ounces, with a head full of dark curls, I watched Theodore hold her for the first time, and I thought, this is it. This is what happiness looks like. But somewhere between those first perfect months and the night I found him with Loretta, something changed. Or maybe it didn't change at all. Maybe the man I thought I married never really was there in the first place, and I'd just been too blinded by love and hope to see the truth. The first crack in our foundation appeared about 3 months after Diane was born. Theodore came home one evening with this strange energy, nervous and jumpy in a way I'd never seen him before. He kissed me hello, held Diane for a few minutes, then said he needed to talk to me about something important. My heart started racing because, in my experience, nothing good ever followed those words. We sat down at the kitchen table, and he told me he'd made some bad investments. He'd been working with a friend, Willie Burke, who'd convinced him to put money into what was supposed to be a sure thing, some kind of real estate flip that promised huge returns. Theodore had invested $20,000. Money I didn't even know we had. Money that apparently came from a loan he'd taken out against our car without telling me. "It'll be fine," he assured me, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Willie knows what he's doing. We'll make back triple what we put in within 6 months. This is going to set us up, baby. This is how we get that house we've been dreaming about." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to demand why he'd made such a huge financial decision without consulting me. But I also wanted to trust my husband, to believe that he had our best interests at heart. So I swallowed my concerns and told him it was okay, that we'd figure it out together. That's what partners do, right? They support each other's decisions, even when they're scared. 6 months passed, and not only did we not see any returns on that investment, but the entire deal fell through. The property had hidden liens, Willie disappeared with most of the money, and Theodore was left holding a debt he couldn't pay. We got letters from the loan company threatening to repossess our car. Theodore promised he'd fix it, that he'd work extra hours and get us back on track. That's when I started picking up extra shifts at the hospital. I was working as a registered nurse in the ICU, which was already demanding work, but I added weekend shifts and occasional night doubles to help bring in more money. Theodore said he was working more too, staying late at the office, taking on additional clients. I'd come home exhausted to find him exhausted too. Both of us too tired to do much more than kiss each other hello and collapse into bed. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way he started being vague about his work schedule, the mysterious phone calls he'd take in the other room, the nights he'd come home smelling like cigarette smoke, even though he'd quit smoking years ago. But I was so focused on keeping our family afloat financially that I didn't stop to question what he was really doing with all those extra hours. The debts kept piling up. First, it was the car loan. Then it was credit card bills I didn't know existed. Then it was money owed to people whose names I never heard before. Theodore would come home with a new crisis every few weeks, a bill that needed to be paid immediately, a person who was threatening to take legal action, a situation that required money we didn't have. "I don't understand," I said to him one night after Diane had gone to bed. We were sitting in the living room, surrounded by papers and bills, trying to figure out how to pay for everything. "Where is all this debt coming from, Theodore? We were doing fine a year ago." He got defensive, which should have been another red flag. "You think I want this? You think I'm happy about this situation? I'm doing everything I can, Teresa. Business is slow right now. Clients aren't paying their premiums on time. The economy is tough. It's not my fault." I apologized for questioning him, even though I had every right to know what was happening with our finances. I told myself that he was stressed, that he was doing his best, and the last thing he needed was his wife adding to his burden by demanding answers. So I worked harder instead. I picked up every extra shift the hospital offered. I skipped lunch breaks to save money. I stopped buying new clothes or treating myself to anything beyond the bare necessities. Then came the day Theodore asked me to sell my wedding jewelry. We were sitting at breakfast, and he brought it up so casually, like he was asking me to pass the salt. "Baby, I know this is hard to hear, but we need to raise some quick cash. There's a pawn shop on Westheimer that'll give us good money for your wedding ring and that necklace I got you for our first anniversary." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "My wedding ring?" I whispered, looking down at the simple gold band that represented everything we'd promised each other. "It's temporary," he assured me, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Just until I close this big deal I've been working on. 3 months, tops, and I'll buy you an even better ring, a bigger diamond, something you really deserve." I should have said no. I should have demanded to see bank statements, to understand exactly where our money was going. But I loved him, and I believed him when he said it was temporary. So I took off my wedding ring, The ring that had belonged to my grandmother, that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in my family, and I watched Theodore walk out the door with it, promising he'd get it back as soon as possible. He never did. When I asked about it a few months later, he got angry and said the pawn shop had sold it and there was nothing he could do. I cried for 3 days straight, not because of the monetary value, but because that ring was my last physical connection to my grandmother, and now it was gone forever, sitting on some stranger's finger. But that wasn't even the worst of it. 2 months after I sold my wedding ring, Theodore came to me with an even more devastating request. My mama had passed away the year before, and she'd left me a single piece of valuable jewelry, a pearl necklace that had been in our family for over 70 years. It wasn't worth a fortune, maybe $3,000 or $4,000, but it meant everything to me. It was the last thing that I had that had belonged to my mama, something I'd planned to pass down to Diane one day. Theodore knew what that necklace meant to me. He'd seen me cry holding it after Mama's funeral, had heard me tell Diane stories about her great-grandmother while showing her the pearls. So when he asked me to sell it, he did it with tears in his own eyes, telling me how ashamed he was to even have to ask, how desperate our situation had become. "We're about to lose the apartment," he said, and his voice was shaking. "They're going to evict us next month if we don't come up with 3 months back rent. I can't let that happen, baby. I can't let our daughter become homeless because of my failures. Please. I know what I'm asking, and I know it's not fair, but I don't know what else to do." What could I say to that? How could I prioritize a necklace, even one with so much sentimental value, over keeping a roof over my daughter's head? So I gave it to him. I placed my mama's pearls in his hands and watched him walk out the door again, taking another piece of my history with him. We didn't get evicted that month, so I assumed the money had gone where Theodore said it would. But years later, I discovered that we were never actually behind on rent. That was a lie. The money from my mama's pearls had gone somewhere else entirely, funding a habit I didn't even know my husband had. My best friend Gloria Patterson was the one person I confided in during all of this. Gloria and I had been friends since nursing school, and she was the sister I never had. She'd been my maid of honor at my wedding, was Diane's godmother, and knew me better than almost anyone. She could tell something was wrong long before I was ready to admit it. "Teresa, something is not adding up," she told me one afternoon when we were on break at the hospital. "You're working yourself to death. You've sold family heirlooms, and you're telling me y'all are still drowning in debt? Where is all the money going?" I got defensive, just like Theodore did when I questioned him. "His business is going through a rough patch," I explained. "Insurance adjusting is seasonal. Things will pick up." Gloria gave me this look, the kind that said she knew I was lying to myself. "Have you actually seen his pay stubs lately? Have you looked at your bank statements?" I hadn't. Theodore handled all our finances, and I trusted him to manage them properly. I was too busy working and taking care of Diane to worry about balancing checkbooks and reviewing expenses. That was his responsibility, and I believed he was handling it properly. "Just be careful," she warned me. "I love you, and I love Theodore, but something doesn't feel right. Promise me you'll pay attention." I promised, but I didn't really mean it. I didn't want to face the possibility that my husband might be lying to me. I didn't want to believe that the man I trusted with my life might be betraying that trust in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. A few weeks after that conversation with Gloria, Theodore came to me with yet another crisis. This time, it was bigger than anything before. He needed $15,000, and he needed it within a week, or something terrible was going to happen. He wouldn't tell me what exactly, just that it was serious and we had no choice. We don't have $15,000, I said, stating the obvious. Theodore, I'm already working every shift I can. We've sold everything valuable we own. Where are we supposed to get that kind of money? He looked at me with desperation in his eyes. Could you ask Gloria? I know she has savings. Maybe she could loan it to us just until... Absolutely not, I interrupted. I am not asking my best friend for money, Theodore. That's not fair to her, and it's humiliating for us. We argued about it for hours. Theodore pulled out every manipulation tactic he had. Guilt, anger, tears, promises. He told me if I really loved him, if I really cared about our family, I'd do whatever it took to help us. He said Gloria would understand, that real friends help each other in times of crisis, that he'd pay her back with interest as soon as his big deal came through. I held out for 3 days, but on the 4th day, Theodore came home looking absolutely defeated. He told me that the people he owed money to had made threats against our family. He said they knew where Diane went to daycare, knew our address, knew our routines. He said if we didn't pay them, something bad was going to happen, and it would be my fault for not doing everything I could to protect our daughter. Looking back, I don't know if any of that was true. I don't know if there really were threats or if Theodore was just trying to scare me into doing what he wanted. But at the time, the possibility that my daughter might be in danger was enough to break my resistance. I called Gloria. I cried on the phone with her for 20 minutes before I could even get the words out. And God bless her, she didn't hesitate. She told me she'd been saving for a down payment on a house, but that money didn't matter as much as helping her best friend. She said she transferred $15,000 into my account that afternoon, and we could work out a payment plan whenever we were back on our feet. You'd do the same for me, she said. And she was right. I would have given her anything she needed without a second thought. Theodore was so grateful when I told him Gloria had agreed to help. He hugged me tight and promised that this was the last time, that he was going to fix everything, that he'd pay Gloria back within 3 months at the most. I wanted so badly to believe him. The money disappeared within a week, and Theodore's explanation for where it went was vague and unsatisfying. He said he paid off the debt, that the threats were gone, that we were safe now. But there was no proof, no documentation, no way for me to verify any of it. I just had to trust him, and trust was becoming increasingly difficult. 3 months passed, then 6 months, and we still hadn't paid Gloria back a single dollar. She never asked about it, never pressured me, but I could see the strain it was putting on our friendship. She'd stopped inviting me out for coffee or lunch, stopped calling just to chat. When we saw each other at work, conversations were polite but distant. I'd lost my best friend's trust, and it was all because of Theodore's lies and my willingness to believe them. Then came the moment everything truly fell apart. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of my shift when I got a call from Houston General Hospital. Gloria had been admitted through the emergency room. She'd collapsed at work, and they were running tests to figure out what was wrong. I rushed to the emergency department, my heart pounding with fear. When I got to Gloria's room, she looked so small and fragile in that hospital bed. Nothing like the strong, vibrant woman I'd known for years. The doctors told me she'd had a severe anxiety attack triggered by extreme stress. Her blood pressure had been dangerously high, and they were concerned about her heart. When Gloria was finally stable enough to talk, she burst into tears the moment she saw me. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want to add to your stress." "What did you want to tell me?" I asked, holding her hand. "Gloria, what's going on?" That's when she told me the truth. The $15,000 she'd loaned us, it hadn't been all her savings. She'd actually borrowed $10,000 of it from her credit union, thinking she'd be able to pay it back quickly once Theodore paid her back.
But 6 months had passed, and now the credit union was threatening legal action against her. She'd been working extra shifts, skipping meals, barely sleeping, trying desperately to make the payments and keep her head above water. And here's the worst part. Because I'd been the one to ask for the loan, and because Gloria had listed me as a reference when she borrowed from the credit union, they were now pursuing me as well. Legally, I was responsible for ensuring the debt was repaid. If Gloria couldn't pay, they'd come after me. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My best friend was in the hospital because of stress I'd caused. She was drowning in debt because she tried to help me. And now I was legally responsible for money I didn't have and couldn't possibly pay back. When I got home that night, Theodore was watching television like nothing was wrong. I told him about Gloria, about the hospital, about the credit union, and the legal threats. I expected him to be horrified, to immediately start figuring out how we could help her. Instead, he just looked annoyed. "That's not our problem," he said, not even looking away from the TV. "She's an adult. She should have been more responsible with her money." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not our problem? Theodore, she's in the hospital because of us, because of the money we borrowed and haven't paid back. He finally looked at me then, and his expression was so cold it made me shiver. I never told her to borrow money from a credit union. That was her choice. If she's in trouble, she needs to deal with it herself. That was the moment I started to see my husband clearly for the first time. The man I'd married, the man I thought I knew, would never have been so callous about someone else's suffering, especially someone who tried to help us. This person sitting on my couch, more concerned about his television show than my best friend's health, was a stranger. But I still wasn't ready to give up. I'd been raised to believe that marriage meant fighting for your relationship, working through the hard times, never giving up on the person you chose to spend your life with. So instead of confronting Theodore about his behavior, I just worked harder. I picked up even more shifts. I started doing overtime whenever it was available. I cut our grocery budget to the bone and started shopping at dollar stores for everything we needed. I was exhausted all the time. I'd work 16-hour shifts and come home to take care of Diane, who was now 3 years old and full of energy. Theodore had stopped helping with childcare, claiming he was too busy with work. So I'd play with Diane, feed her dinner, give her a bath, read her stories, and tuck her into bed, all while fighting to keep my eyes open. Then I'd fall into bed myself, sleep for a few hours, and wake up to do all of that all over again. My body started breaking down. I developed chronic back pain from being on my feet so much. I had constant headaches. I lost weight because I was skipping meals to save money and because I was too tired to eat. My coworkers started asking if I was okay, and I'd lie and say everything was fine, that I was just tired, that I'd rest soon. Gloria recovered from her hospital stay, but our friendship was irreparably damaged. She was polite when she saw me, but the warmth was gone. The trust was gone. And I didn't blame her one bit. I'd brought this into her life, and now she was suffering the consequences. It was during this exhausting, desperate time that Theodore suggested we hire a nanny. At first, I thought he was joking. We could barely afford groceries, and he wanted to pay someone to help with childcare? But he insisted it made financial sense. "Think about it," he said one evening after I'd come home from another double shift. "You're wearing yourself out trying to work and take care of Diane. If we had help with her, you could pick up even more shifts, make more money. It'll pay for itself." The logic was twisted, but I was too tired to argue. And honestly, the idea of having help with Diane was appealing. I missed spending quality time with my daughter. Most days I felt more like a zombie going through the motions of motherhood than an actual present parent. Maybe having a nanny would allow me to be both a provider and a mother instead of having to choose between the two. Theodore said he'd handle finding someone, and a week later, he introduced me to Loretta Holt. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with smooth brown skin and a warm smile that seemed genuine. She told me she'd been working as a nanny for the past 3 years, that she loved children, and that she was looking for a long-term position with a family she could really connect with. I liked her immediately. She seemed sweet and competent, the kind of person I could trust with my daughter. When I asked for references, she provided them without hesitation, and when I called them, they all said wonderful things about her. She was punctual, reliable, great with kids, and respectful of boundaries. Everything I wanted in someone who'd be spending so much time in our home. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known at the time, was that Theodore had found Loretta through sources I never would have approved of. She hadn't come to us through a nanny agency or through word of mouth from friends. She'd come through his world, through the dark web of debt and lies he'd been spinning around our family for years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the time, I just saw a nice young woman who'd help me take care of my daughter while I worked myself to death trying to save a marriage that was already long gone. Loretta started working for us the following Monday. Her schedule was flexible. She'd come in whenever I had to work and Theodore couldn't be home, which was pretty much every day. She'd watch Diane, keep the house tidy, and sometimes even have dinner started when I got home from my shifts. In those first few weeks, she seemed like an absolute blessing. Theodore seemed happier with Loretta around, which I initially interpreted as him being relieved that we had help. He'd come home earlier than he had in months, always greeting Loretta with the warm smile and asking how her day had been. He'd play with Diane while Loretta cleaned up the kitchen, and for brief moments, we almost felt like a normal family again. I was so grateful for the help that I didn't notice the small things, how Theodore would laugh a little too loudly at Loretta's jokes, how he'd find excuses to be in whatever room she was in, how he'd touch her shoulder casually when thanking her for something, a familiarity that should have made me uncomfortable, but that I dismissed as friendliness. Loretta was living with us by the end of her first month. She'd mentioned having trouble with her landlord, something about rent increases and unsafe living conditions, and Theodore had immediately offered her our guest room. "It makes sense," he'd said when he brought up the idea. "She's here every day anyway, and this way she can be available if we need her during odd hours. Plus, we can pay her a little less and she won't have rent to worry about." I should have said no. I should have recognized how inappropriate it was to have this young woman living in our home. But I was so worn down, so desperate for help, and so trusting of my husband's judgment that I agreed. Loretta moved into our guest room, and just like that, she became part of our household in a way that went far beyond employer and employee. The first few weeks of having Loretta live with us were actually nice. She'd have coffee ready in the morning before I left for work. She'd fold my laundry and leave it neatly stacked on my bed. She'd prepare meals that were ready to eat when I dragged myself home after a long shift. She'd give me updates on Diane's day, what they'd played, what she'd eaten, any cute things she'd said or done. It felt like having a younger sister or a daughter, someone who genuinely wanted to make my life easier. But then I started noticing things that made me uneasy. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence or my imagination. Like how Loretta would sometimes wear my clothes. Casual things like t-shirts and sweats that I'd left in the laundry room. When I mentioned it to Theodore, he told me I was being petty. That Loretta probably just grabbed whatever was clean and didn't realize it was mine. Or how she'd sit just a little too close to Theodore on the couch when they were watching TV together after I'd gone to bed. I'd come downstairs for a glass of water and find them like that, and Loretta would scoot away quickly, suddenly very interested in her phone. Theodore would explain that they'd just been talking about the show, nothing inappropriate, and I'd feel silly for being suspicious. There were the late-night conversations, too. I'm a light sleeper, probably from years of working night shifts and being attuned to every sound. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and hear voices downstairs, Theodore and Loretta, talking in low tones. When I asked Theodore about it, he said Loretta sometimes had trouble sleeping, and he'd go downstairs to make tea and ended up chatting with her. She's lonely, he explained. She doesn't have family in Houston. Is it so wrong to be friendly to someone who's helping us so much? When he put it that way, I felt guilty for being suspicious. Here was this young woman who'd left her own life to help take care of mine, and I was begrudging her a little friendly conversation? What kind of person did that make me? But the unease kept growing. Loretta's lifestyle started to change in ways that didn't make sense, given what we were paying her. She got a new phone, an expensive one that cost more than my monthly salary. When I commented on it, she said it was a gift from a family member. Then came new clothes, designer pieces that I recognized from magazines and Instagram, the kind of clothes I could never afford, even before our financial troubles. My aunt likes to spoil me, Loretta explained with a shrug when I asked about a particularly expensive-looking purse she started carrying. She doesn't have kids of her own, so she treats me like a daughter. It seemed plausible enough, but something about it bothered me. I couldn't quite put my finger on what felt wrong, but the feeling was there, nagging at the back of my mind whenever I saw Loretta with her new things. Theodore became increasingly protective of Loretta. If I asked her to do something, simple things that were part of her job, like making sure Diane's toys were picked up or starting a load of laundry, he'd jump in and say she'd already done enough that day, that I shouldn't be so demanding. If I gave her any kind of correction or feedback, he'd pull me aside later and tell me I was being too harsh, that Loretta was sensitive, and I needed to be more careful with how I spoke to her. She's not our servant, he'd say, even though we were literally paying her to help us. She's doing us a huge favor by being here. The least we can do is treat her with respect. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home, like I had to walk on eggshells around both Theodore and Loretta, careful not to upset the delicate balance they'd created. I was working myself to exhaustion to pay for everything, while simultaneously being made to feel like I was the problem, like I was the one being unreasonable and difficult. Gloria noticed the change in me during one of the rare moments when we were on break together at the hospital. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. "And I don't mean that to be mean. I mean, you look like you're barely holding it together." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to pour out all my fears and suspicions and confusion, but shame kept my mouth shut. Shame that my marriage was falling apart, shame that I dragged her into our financial mess, shame that I couldn't seem to make anything in my life work the way it was supposed to. "I'm just tired," I told her, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. "Working a lot." She studied me for a long moment, and I could see she wanted to push, wanted to dig deeper, and make me talk about what was really going on. But she'd been burned by our friendship once already, and I couldn't blame her for being cautious about getting involved again. "Just remember that you deserve better than this. Whatever this is, you deserve better." I carried those words with me for weeks, turning them over in my mind during the quiet moments between the chaos. Did I deserve better? Or was this just what marriage looked like when times got hard? Maybe every couple went through periods like this where everything felt wrong and uncomfortable, but you just had to push through until things got better again. That's what I told myself. Because the alternative, accepting that my marriage was built on lies and that my husband had been manipulating me for years, was too painful to face. Then came the night that changed everything, though I didn't understand its significance until much later. It was around 2 a.m, and I'd woken up with terrible heartburn from the gas station sandwich I'd eaten for dinner. Theodore wasn't in bed, which wasn't unusual anymore. He spent most nights on the couch, claiming he didn't want to disturb me when he came to bed late. I went to the bathroom for some antacid, and as I was walking back to the bedroom, I heard voices downstairs, not just talking this time, but arguing. Theodore's voice was sharp and agitated, and there was another male voice I didn't recognize, and Loretta was down there too. I could hear her speaking, though I couldn't make out her words. I crept to the top of the stairs, my heart pounding. I knew eavesdropping was wrong, but something told me this was important, that I needed to hear whatever was being said down there in the middle of the night.
Not my problem, Theodore was saying, his voice tight with anger. I've been making payments. I need more time. Time is money, the unfamiliar voice replied, cold and flat. And you're out of both. The people I work for aren't patient, and they sure as hell aren't forgiving. I'm doing everything I can, Theodore said, and there was a desperation in his voice I'd never heard before. My wife is working constantly. Your wife? The stranger laughed, but there was no humor in it. Man, your wife has no idea what you've been doing, does she? Does she know about the games? About how much you've really lost? My blood ran cold. Games? Lost? What was this man talking about? That's none of your business, Theodore said. Everything about you is my business until you pay what you owe, the stranger replied. Now, let's talk about the real reason I'm here. Has she been doing her job? There was a pause, and then Loretta spoke. Yes, I've been documenting everything like you asked. Their schedules, their finances, where they go, who they see. They have no idea. I had to press my hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. They were talking about me, about us. Loretta wasn't who she said she was. She'd been planted in our home to spy on us, to make sure Theodore couldn't escape whatever debt he'd gotten us into. And Theodore had known. He'd invited this woman into our house, let her sleep under our roof, trusted her with our daughter, all while knowing she was there to monitor us for people he owed money to. The mention of games kept echoing in my head. What games? And then, like pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place, I started to understand. The mysterious debt that kept growing, the vague explanations about where money went, the late nights he claimed to be working. Theodore had a gambling problem, and apparently he'd been hiding it from me for years, while it destroyed our lives. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't know how. Instead, I started paying more attention. I started watching both Theodore and Loretta with new eyes, seeing patterns I'd missed before, like how protective Theodore was of Loretta, not because he was being kind, but because he needed to keep her happy, keep her reporting positive things to whoever had sent her. Or how Loretta's expensive new things coincided with Theodore getting large sums of money. She wasn't being spoiled by a generous aunt. She was being paid, probably with money he'd borrowed or stolen, to do her job and keep her mouth shut about what she knew. I started checking our financial records, something I should have done years ago. What I found was devastating. Bank accounts I didn't know existed, all of them empty or overdrawn. Loans from places I'd never heard of, with interest rates that should have been illegal. We were drowning in debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars of it, and Theodore had hidden it all from me. But that wasn't the worst discovery. No, the worst came when I was digging through old emails on our shared computer, looking for anything that might explain how we'd gotten into this mess. That's when I found messages between Theodore and various gambling websites, poker, sports betting, online casinos. He'd been losing money for years, chasing losses, convinced the next big win was just around the corner. I found emails to loan sharks, people with names like Raymond McKenney and Floyd Goodman, negotiating terms for loans that came with threats attached. You understand the consequences of defaulting. We know where you live. We know your family's routines. Payment is not optional. My hands were shaking as I read through the messages.
My husband had put our entire family at risk. He'd brought dangerous people into our lives, people who knew where we lived and where our daughter went to daycare. And then he'd brought one of their people into our home, given her access to every part of our lives, trusted her with our child, all while knowing she was there to monitor us for people he owed money to. I printed everything I could find and hid the papers in a folder at the back of my closet. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information yet, but I knew I needed to keep it safe, needed to have proof of what Theodore had done. The next few weeks were torture. I had to act normal, had to pretend I didn't know what I knew, all while working my exhausting shifts and coming home to a house that felt like enemy territory. Every time Loretta smiled at me, I wanted to scream. Every time Theodore touched my shoulder or kissed my cheek, I felt sick. I started watching them more carefully, looking for signs of what else might be going on. And unfortunately, I found them. The way Theodore's hand would linger on Loretta's back when he passed her in the hallway, the private jokes they shared, the looks that passed between them when they thought I wasn't paying attention. One afternoon, I came home from work earlier than I expected. My shift had been cut short because the hospital was overstaffed that day. I walked into the house to find it quiet, which was unusual. Diane should have been awake from her nap, and there should have been sounds of playing or TV. I walked through the downstairs, checking the kitchen and living room. Empty. Then I heard it. Voices from upstairs. Adult voices. Coming from the guest room that Loretta stayed. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Part of me wanted to turn around, to leave the house and pretend I'd never come home early. But I'd spent too long looking away from uncomfortable truths. It was time to face reality, whatever that reality turned out to be. The door to Loretta's room was closed, but not locked. I stood outside it, listening. Theodore was in there with her. I could hear his voice clearly, low and intimate in a way he hadn't spoken to me in years. "You're so beautiful. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd survive," she replied, and she sounded amused. "You're stronger than you think." "Not without you, I'm not. You keep me sane. You make all of this bearable." There was silence then, and my imagination filled in what might be happening. Were they kissing? Were they lying on her bed together? How long had this been going on, and how had I been so blind? Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "I'm tired of being hidden," Loretta said, and her voice was different now, harder, with an edge to it. "You promised me things would change. You said once you got the money situation handled, we could be together properly. I'm tired of being the secret." "I know, baby, I know. Just give me a little more time. I'm working on it. Once I get clear of these debts, once I figure out how to—" He stopped mid-sentence. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door. I barely had time to step back before it opened, and Theodore was standing there staring at me with wide eyes. "Teresa," he said, and he actually had the audacity to sound surprised, as if I was the one doing something wrong for being in my own house. "What are you doing home?" I looked past him into the room. Loretta was sitting on her bed, fully clothed, but there was something about her expression, guilty and defiant at the same time, that told me everything I needed to know. "I live here," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, cold and distant, in case you'd forgotten. "Your shift wasn't supposed to end until 5, Theodore said, and I noticed he didn't deny anything, didn't try to explain why he'd been in Loretta's room in the middle of the day, telling her how beautiful she was. "They were overstaffed. Where's Diane?" "Taking a nap in her room," Loretta answered, standing up. "She went down about an hour ago." I nodded slowly, looking between the two of them. "I need to talk to my husband. Alone." Loretta looked at Theodore, waiting for permission. That's what did it. That's what made something inside me crack. She looked at my husband for permission to leave a room in my house, and he gave it to her with a small nod. We stood there in the hallway, Theodore and I, just staring at each other. There was so much I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted to ask, so many accusations I wanted to throw at him. But all that came out was, how long? He didn't pretend not to understand. It's not what you think. How long? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Teresa, you've been so stressed lately, so tired all the time. You're never here. Loretta and I, we got close. She understands me. She's not here to understand you, I said, and my voice was shaking now. She's here to spy on us. She was sent by the people you owe money to. I heard the conversation, Theodore. I know what she really is. His face went pale. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. Explain how you've been gambling away our lives. Explain the hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Explain why you brought a spy into our home and then started sleeping with her. I'm not sleeping with her, he said, but even as he said it, I could see the lie in his eyes. Don't, I whispered. Don't make this worse by lying to me now. I deserve at least that much honesty. We stood there for a long moment, and I watched something change in his expression. The guilt faded away, replaced by something harder, colder. This was the real Theodore, I realized. This is who he'd been all along, and I'd been blinded by love to see it. You want honesty? He said. Fine. Yes, Loretta and I have gotten close. Yes, she makes me happy in a way you haven't in years. You're exhausted all the time. You're no fun anymore. All you do is work and complain about money. Loretta is young and fun, and she doesn't make me feel like a failure every time I walk in the door. Each word was like a knife to my heart. This was the man I'd married? The man I'd sacrificed everything for? I made you feel like a failure? I asked incredulously. Theodore, I've been killing myself trying to fix the disaster you created. I've worked myself to the bone. I've sold my most precious possessions. I've destroyed my friendship with Gloria, all trying to save us from your gambling addiction. It's not an addiction. I just had some bad luck. It happens. And if you'd been more supportive instead of being so negative all the time, maybe I wouldn't have needed to find comfort elsewhere. I actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. You're blaming me for your cheating? You're saying this is my fault? I'm saying that marriage is supposed to be a partnership, and you've been treating it like a burden. So yes, maybe if you'd been a better wife, I wouldn't have fallen for someone else. That was it. That was the moment whatever love I still had for Theodore Warren died completely. I looked at this man, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and I felt nothing but contempt. Get out of my way, I said quietly. Teresa, get out of my way. He stepped aside, and I walked past him, went to Diane's room, and picked up my sleeping daughter. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake as I carried her downstairs. I grabbed my purse and my keys and walked out of that house without looking back. I drove to Gloria's apartment, praying she'd open the door, praying our friendship wasn't so broken that she'd turn me away. When she saw me standing there with Diane in my arms and tears streaming down my face, she didn't ask any questions. She just pulled me inside and held me while I fell apart. I told her everything that night, about the gambling, the debts, the lies, about Loretta being planted in our home to spy on us, about what I had overheard, what I discovered, what Theodore had said to me in that hallway. Gloria listened to all of it, and when she was done, she said something I'll never forget. You're not going back there. I have to, I said. It's my house. My things are there. I can't just... Yes, you can. And you will. Because if you go back there, you're going to forgive him. You're going to tell yourself you can fix this, that you can save the marriage, and he's going to destroy you completely. So you're staying here with me until we figure out what to do next. I stayed with Gloria for 3 days. During that time, Theodore called constantly, sent dozens of text messages, even showed up at Gloria's apartment once. She answered the door and told him in no uncertain terms that if he didn't leave immediately, she'd call the police. On the 4th day, I went back to the house when I knew Theodore would be at work. I needed to get some clothes for Diane and me, needed to gather important documents. I used my key to let myself in quietly, planning to be in and out as quickly as possible. But the house wasn't empty. I heard voices from the living room. Theodore and Loretta, talking in low, urgent tones. "She's not coming back," Theodore was saying. "She's too stubborn. She'll file for divorce and then we'll lose everything." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Loretta replied. "If she files, you can claim you're broke in the divorce. She won't get anything because there's nothing to get. Then, once it's final, we can start fresh." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were planning to scam me out of whatever assets we had left. Theodore was going to claim poverty in the divorce while hiding money somewhere I couldn't find it. "What about the debts?" Theodore asked. "We'll deal with those," Loretta said. "Raymond and Floyd aren't going to wait forever, but if you can keep them off your back for a few more months, I can help you restructure everything. My brother knows people who can help with that kind of thing." Her brother. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Loretta's connection to the loan sharks wasn't just professional, it was personal. Her brother was probably one of them, which explains why she'd been so perfectly positioned to spy on us. I stood there in my own hallway, listening to my husband and the woman he'd been cheating with plan my financial destruction, and something changed inside me.
The grief and heartbreak I'd been carrying for days transformed into something else, something harder and more focused. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I was going to fight back, but I was going to do it smart. I was going to gather evidence, document everything, and make sure that when this was over, the truth came out and justice was served. I backed out of the house silently and left without getting the things I'd come for. They could wait. Right now, I had more important things to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I'd never been before. I went back to our shared computer and copied every file I could find. Emails, bank statements, messages, gambling records. I made notes of every conversation I'd overheard. I took photos of Loretta's expensive purchases, documented every time she and Theodore were alone together. I contacted a lawyer, a tough woman named Maddie Burke, who specialized in messy divorces. I showed her everything I found, and her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, honey," she said, "he's going to regret ever crossing you." But I also did something else, something I hadn't told anyone about yet. I reached out to an investigative journalist named Eddie Reeves, who worked for the Houston Chronicle. Eddie had a reputation for taking down corrupt people, for exposing liars and cheats. I sent him an anonymous email with just enough information to get him interested. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. Theodore had scammed other people too. I'd found evidence of at least 5 other women he'd borrowed money from over the years, all of them believing his lies about business troubles. Some of them had lost their savings trying to help him. They deserved justice too. But I had to be patient. I had to wait for the right moment. And that moment came 3 weeks after I'd left the house, when Gloria got a call from a mutual friend. Theodore was planning to sell our house. He was claiming he needed to liquidate assets to pay off debt.
But I knew better. He was trying to hide money, to make it look like we had nothing so he could cheat me in the divorce. Let him try, Maddie said when I told her. Let him dig his hole deeper. We're gathering evidence of his fraud, and the deeper he digs, the harder he's going to fall. Then I had an idea. A brilliant, terrible, perfect idea. I called Theodore for the first time since I'd left the house. "Theodore," he said, and he actually sounded happy to hear from me. "Baby, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about everything, and you're right. I messed up. I want to fix this. I want us to be a family again." His lies were so smooth, so practiced. How many times had he manipulated me with words like these? "I've been thinking too," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I think we need to talk. Really talk. Maybe we can work this out." Yes, absolutely. When? Where?" "Come to Gloria's apartment tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. We'll have dinner and talk everything through. But Theodore, it's just us. Don't bring Loretta." He agreed immediately, probably thinking he'd charmed his way back into my life, probably already planning how he'd continue manipulating me while hiding his affair and his debts. What he didn't know was that I wasn't planning a reconciliation. I was planning something entirely else.